Ali shifted the crowbar to her left hand as she glanced up and down the length of the plywood boards covering the space below her home. The crawl space had been boarded up since before Ali bought the property. The real estate agent had said it would make an excellent storage space, though, and with another 5 months until the weather would be warm enough to work in her garden, Ali figured she might as well put the storage space to use and clear up her yard. Ali approached one of the plywood boards and pressed the tip of her crowbar into the narrow gap above it. The wood had discoloured from years of exposure to the weather, but it had held up surprisingly well. It groaned, creaked and cracked as Ali forced the gap wider, and then it broke free with a loud snap. She pulled the board away and threw it aside, leaving a 2-foot opening into the crawl space. She dropped the crowbar and picked up the torch she had set on the porch. Ali angled the harsh white beam into the space below. It was larger than she had expected. While only a 3-foot-high gap was visible from outside, the ground dipped just past the entrance, creating nearly enough room for a person to stand upright. It was hard to see with only a small circle of light, but there seemed to be items already stored in the space below her home. She saw something that looked like a broken chair, as well as a pile of bags nestled into the corner. The house's support pillars blocked much of her view, and Ali, with a final glance at the garden, lowered herself into the crawl space. It was a tight fit through the plywood hole, but just beyond, the ground dropped away and she was able to move forward when she crouched. The air was much cooler than outside. A smell, dirty, musty and decayed, hung in the air. Ali pressed her sleeve over her nose to block out the stench and moved towards the plastic bags. They were all sealed, but several had split down the side. They looked as though they were filled with garbage. Did the previous owners seriously leave their trash down here? Ali poked at one of the split bags with her foot, and rags fell out. They looked as if there had once been clothes, but had been worn down until holes developed and seams broke, making them unwearable. Under the clothes were broken plates and cups and bent cutlery. A quiet scratching noise disturbed her, and Ali turned in time to see a rat scamper out of her torch's light to hide behind a mattress. Ali approached the lumpy shape, trying to breathe through her mouth as much as possible. The mattress had broken down and several of its springs poked through the fabric, but strangely enough, someone seemed to have patched it with rags similar to the ones in the bags. It was pressed against one of the support pillars, which had hidden it from view of Ali's hole in the plywood. Beyond the mattress, a handmade shelf stood propped against the wall. Ali moved towards it, then jumped as her foot hit something, sending it clattering across the dirt. She turned the torch down and saw empty tins, dozens of them, littering the ground. A voice in the back of Ali's head had started to panic. It was telling her to get out, and get out fast. But curiosity compelled her towards the shelf. She cast her light over the odd collection arranged on the wooden boards. A plate, a cup, a spoon, a fork and a knife. Next to them sat 2 candle stubs, burnt down to their bases. On the shelf below stood a strange assortment of toys. A doll, too filthy for use, a pull toy that had lost almost all of its bright paint, and a colouring book, propped upright as though it were an art display. Ali reached towards it gingerly and pulled the cover back. The pages inside had been coloured so thoroughly and so vigorously that she couldn't see a single inch of white paper. It was almost as though its owner had been over the same pages dozens of times. Even so, the colouring was crude, and in many cases the artist hadn't even tried to stay within the lines. The final item on the shelf was a Polaroid camera. It reminded Ali of the camera she had inherited from her grandfather. She thought she still had it in storage somewhere, although she hadn't seen it in years. Nausea was rising in Ali's stomach. She turned towards the crawl space's exit and froze. A series of Polaroid photos were stuck to the pillar beside the mattress. They were clumsy and often blurry, but it was impossible for Ali to mistake the subject. The photos were of her. Some showed her digging in her yard. That must have been months ago, when I planted the garden. And others were of her leaving the house and locking the door behind herself. A final series stuck in pride of place near the mattress's head had been taken through her bedroom window and showed Ali asleep in her bed. In the closest photo, Ali wore the pyjamas she had purchased just a week previously. Ali's hand rose to cover her mouth. She turned towards the square of light in the plywood wall, her escape, and inhaled sharply. A person, or something that resembled a person, stood in the light. His face was strangely sagged, as though his body had been sucked dry. His eyes bugged out of his head with a terrific intensity. Limp hair ran down to frame his cheeks, which housed an unnaturally large mouth. Then his mouth opened, splitting into a smile, as the batteries in Ali's light died.